Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press and the Pocket Edition of the Creature Codex. Do you love the Creature Codex so much you want to keep it close to your heart? Well, guess what? Now you can. Get all of the nearly 400 foes of the original Creature Codex for half the price, just $24.99. This small softcover version of the book is more convenient and portable. You can take it wherever you want to go. Great imaginative creatures like the Keg Golem, Shark Bowl, Ooze, Bar Brawl, Hierophant Lich, Wasteland Dragons, and hundreds more are in here, including several by this guy. That's me, yours truly, James Introcaso. All play-tested and built by the industry's best designers. That's from the copy. I would not call myself one of the industry's best designers. I am humbled. Thank you, Kobold Press Copy, for giving that to us. Find out more at koboldpress.com and tell them DSPN sent you. It's the Creature Codex Pocket Edition. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I'm talking with Andrew from Roll for Persuasion. Roll for Persuasion is a great podcast. If you like Tabletop Babble, you're going to love Roll for Persuasion. It's like this show, but like more professional and awesome. So go check it out after you listen to my interview with its host, the great and wonderful Andrew. Okay, everybody, now I am here with one of my new favorite people. I just met Andrew a couple weeks ago. We were quarantine buds on a podcast together. Now Andrew has come on my podcast after I've been on his. So for people who don't know Andrew, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Yeah, there's no catalyst for friendship quite like being quarantined together, right?
Yeah, exactly.
My name is Andrew Richardson. I am a podcaster. I'm a D&D player. I host a show called Roll for Persuasion, where I chat with creatives and entrepreneurs in the D&D space. Gaming, entertainment is kind of branching out a little bit, very similar to what you do. So yeah, once a week I chat with cool people in the community. You were recently one of those cool people. We just talk about their games and how they influence their creative efforts and businesses and the different things that they have going on.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Well, it sounds like a great show. It is a great show that people should check out. Roll for Persuasion is just so much fun, and it was a ton of fun to be on and to chat with you. Take me back. When did you first start playing tabletop role-playing games? Like what did you play? Who were you? What was your role? All that kind of stuff.
Right. So, well, I'll tell you. You want the long version or the short version?
Hey, long version.
All right.
I'm quarantined. So, where am I going?
Right. 5 days later, because it'll still be Thursday because the day doesn't change. Or today's Wednesday. That's how bad the day awareness is. So I've been playing. I started playing D&D in early 2016. So just about 4 years now. I have been D&D adjacent since I was probably like 8 or 9. Reading stuff like R.A. Salvatore's like the Drizzt Do'Urden books. Set in the Forgotten Realms, which as a kid I did not know was in Dungeons and Dragons. I only found that out like 3 years ago. I was like, oh, it all starts to make sense. Before we started playing D&D, me and my wife and our friend group have been into tabletop games for a while. Our gateway drug to playing D&D was a game called Time Stories, which is made by a company out of France called Space Cowboys, and it's not too dissimilar from like the D&D tabletop game in a box that they sell, where it's kind of a self-contained game. So there was some role-playing elements to that. There was dice rolling. And eventually we were like, hey, do you guys want to try and play D&D? Like it was very like, hey, we don't want to weird you out or scare you off. But what if we did this? And then we'll LARP. Like we'll just dive in. But yeah, so we did that. I happened to come across a video of Critical Role. And I was like, oh, because I was trying to figure out how to play D&D. I was like, oh, I can do anything. I definitely want to play this game. I can do anything. So I offered to DM a campaign, and we went from there.
Yeah, that is huge, right? That sort of your first foray into like a full-scale Dungeons and Dragons game was you threw yourself in as the dungeon master. And I know we talked about this on your show a little bit, but like I feel like so many people, right, have the other opposite experience of, they start as a player and build their way up, learn the rules, all that kind of stuff. You just dove right in. That was crazy.
Yeah, well, I think I lucked out because right around that time was after fifth edition. I guess fifth edition released in maybe 2015. I'm not sure. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
summer of 2014.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So it had only been out for a couple of years, and I remember finding out that there was D&D and there was Pathfinder, and I was like, I don't know which to play, and I was like, I think I'm going to play Pathfinder. People seem to really like it, and then for some reason, I think I came across a Reddit post where somebody was like, if you're really into role play or kind of less rules heavy, give D&D a try. And I was like, well, I want to improv, I want to make stuff up, so I guess I'll try D&D. And then I came across the Critical Role video where they did some ridiculous thing, and I was like, oh, I really can just make anything up. And so for me, it was like, well, I love improv. I love creativity, thinking stuff up on the fly, and as little prep for anything as possible. Which you've been on my show, and so I was like, all right, I'll try DMing. Like my main thought was, I'm pretty sure I can do this. Like I know that I'm a creative, improv heavy person in general, and I want to give my players, who at that time was my wife and our best friends, another couple, I wanted to give them a good experience with as little on their plates as possible. So I wasn't going to ask them to try and figure out how to do it. I didn't want to go and try and find someone to run the campaign and possibly put the stress of like bringing in a new person and having like performance anxiety in front of someone that we didn't know. I was like, you know what, let's figure out a way to make this safe and comfortable. So I ordered the starter kit. I checked out the which came with Lost Mines of Phandelver. I checked out the source books from the library, and I met a very friendly librarian who was so excited that I was there to try and find the D&D books. He was like, I tried for years to get them to buy these, and they didn't believe me that we needed to buy copies, but the library finally let me book. Here, take them. And so he kind of, his name was Craig, I think, gave me a kind of a crash course there in the middle of the book stacks. But yeah, I took the approach of, if I get anything wrong, it doesn't matter. I was like, as long as we have fun, it doesn't matter, and we can figure out the rules while we go. So that's what I did, and it went well enough that here I am still talking with people about it. So there you go.
That's huge, right? That first game means a lot, and there's a lot of people I know who maybe had a game, when they were a young adult or a kid or whatever, and then sometimes for decades don't return to it because the experience was so bad. Whereas you clearly have gone the other way. You have a podcast now, you've embraced it, right? Like you've done a lot with the hobby in a very short amount of time. How did you sort of decide to get involved and create Roll for Persuasion and just jump in, again, started as the dungeon master, now you're here. Like, how did it happen?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I should probably figure out the answer to that. That's a really good question. I think it just kind of naturally came about. I've always done acting and performance since I was a kid, and I haven't been able to do it actively since college, which was, I guess, almost 10 years ago now. And so D&D started scratching that itch for me, right? That kind of performative itch, especially after we got through Phandelver. We eventually found a DM to DM a campaign for us on Craigslist of all places. We found a guy on Craigslist, I think. I don't even remember. It was crazy. And so I was getting to play as a player, and I was like, oh, I forgot what this felt like, getting to perform and kind of get into a character. And because of that, I was very much drawn to Critical Role, obviously, with a group of actors doing what I love in front of all other people. And so for a while, it was like, how can I be involved in this community? I was like, I guess I could write supplements for, like Drive Through RPG or DM's Guild or something. And I enjoyed writing, but I was like, that didn't fit. I was like, well, I could get on a stream. And I was like, okay, but like what you really want is to like be on a Critical Role level stream with people who are like actors. And you can't just like go and find that out of the blue.
Right.
I was like, okay, well, what if I did a podcast? Because I'm a middle-aged white dude. That's what we do. I'm approaching my 30s. It's time. And I was like, okay, that kind of scratched the itch. I thought about podcasting in general for a while. I enjoyed them. I like hearing myself talk. And so I was like, well, that could work. And it took me a bit to figure out what it would be. And And so I kind of looked around, I did some research, and you know this because you're one of the few shows that does this. There are not a lot of podcasts that are not actual play. Like there are many actual play, which is great.
Huge.
And I was like,
and
that's
tons
yeah,
and tons.
and there are 5 new ones every minute, which is great. By the way, if you are thinking about starting an actual play, or if you do that, go for it. There's no reason not to. It's not like we're gonna run out of space for shows.
Right.
But I was like, okay, what do I want to do? I don't want to sit here and have people listen to me talk about D&D because I don't really feel like I have the bona fides. I haven't been playing for X number of years. My experience, especially when I was thinking about this, which was probably 2018, it took me a year to actually start it. I was like, I don't have the wherewithal to, do deep dives into the rules. But I like talking to people. Like my favorite things, what drew me to the game is storytelling and connectivity, connecting with people. It's like, okay, so I need to have people on. Okay, what should I talk about? And so looking around, especially at that time, you really started to see a lot of businesses and entrepreneurs growing up around a game, which I thought was really fascinating. Especially I work in e-commerce and like online sales. And so seeing these small e-com businesses and like small businesses start because of a game was really fascinating to me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to talk to entrepreneurs. I'm going to talk to creatives, people who are taking their game off their table and kind of integrating it into what they do in their life. I was like, cool, it's a great idea. And then for like 8 months, I didn't do anything because the fear of starting is such a big barrier. I think for a lot of people, like, oh, I have an idea, and then we just don't get around to it. But long story short, I don't remember what it was that finally made me go, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this. I bought equipment. I was like, well, I'm financially invested now, so I need to do something. And I reached out to a few people on Twitter, very fearfully. I will be honest, like I'm afraid of rejection. Hey, I'm going to start a podcast. Do you want to be on it? And people said yes. And so I launched the show in October of 2019. And yeah, so I just I don't know when this will air, but here in mid-April is my 6-month anniversary on the show, and we've had some pretty cool people on, some pretty cool episodes.
Well, congratulations on keeping it going 6 months. It's not an easy thing to do, as I know you have learned. It's more than just shouting into a microphone. In fact, that's the shortest part of it, right? The editing, the promotion, all that kind of stuff is huge. When you reached out to people, I'm curious, like who were your first couple of people that you thought these are the people I want to reach out to have on the show?
So initially, I got on Twitter, which I used to hate Twitter. Like I used to think Twitter was the most useless, dumb place. I would rant about, anytime somebody would come and be like, "Why don't we start a Twitter for our business?" I'm like, "Why? Why would you do that? That's like what a waste." And I'm now on Twitter more hours every day than I should be. But I got on Twitter. I started following creatives that I knew of, kind of the bigger names. Then I started, using the suggested list on Twitter of like, hey, if you like following this person, maybe follow James. So I started following people. And I remember I saw a tweet from the guy who ended up being my first guest. And it's actually, we'll have just had another episode interview air. By the time this comes out, his name's John Baltina of Cauldron and Tower. And he was doing like a giveaway. And he had this really cool looking shirt. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll enter this giveaway. And I won. And so we were chatting about him sending me a t-shirt. And I was like, hey, by the way, because his company does like clothing and music and adventure modules. But he had also kind of just been starting out. So I was like, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? And he said, yes. And then from that, I said, hey, who do you know that you also think should be on my show? And he suggested a couple other people who ended up being some of my initial folk. The other one was Ian Phillips, Iron Tusk Painting. He paints the miniatures for Critical Role and for a lot of the stuff that CR does on their channel. I just hit him up out of the blue and he said yes. And then from there, people saying yes just kind of gave me the confidence to keep asking. And just kind of steamrolled.
Yeah, that's great, right? And what's cool is I love that your podcast explores all of these kind of different aspects of the tabletop role-playing game marketplace, right? And I think you addressed it really well when you said it's a growing business. There's all sorts of new areas popping up that I think, like, I didn't even dream about 5 years ago in some cases, right? We've got dungeon loot crate type things showing up. We've got more dice makers than you can shake a stick at these days. We've got people making t-shirts. We've got people who are making, custom knitted items, all kinds of stuff. What are some of the more unusual businesses that you have come across, either on your podcast or just sort of as being part of the community and exploring this area?
Man, there are so many, and it's cool because, like I said, my day job is ecom and like direct to consumer sales, and so I'm a big advocate of finding, like, for people launching businesses, finding a good niche, and like the more specific, the better. And so there are people I've seen in the tabletop community who have really leaned into that. I feel bad because I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but there's a guy who's an Etsy shop. I talk about him on my episode with John Boltina. So if you guys go back and check that out, you can hear it there. But he makes, like, all he makes are like tables and like settings, like 3D prints, and just beautifully paints like tables and like interior building settings for like your 3D terrain. And he puts these tiny little LED lights in them so that like the braziers flicker with fire and the little candles light up. And it's just such an entirely specific, like, it's not full on Dwarven Forge. It's not, we're going to make the whole dungeon. It is like the best tables. If you want the best tables and the best little lanterns, like, this guy has them on his Etsy shop. And then there are, other people who make, all they do is make risers, right? So if you want to put your miniatures at different levels, because you've got a dragon up here and people can't see me motioning, but I'm waving my arm. You've got a dragon up here and people down there. And he just makes really fantastic acrylic risers. And so I think stuff like that's really interesting, the hyper niche. One of my favorites, and this will sound like a plug because they sponsor my show, but they're also a friend. One of my early guests was a guy named Dave who has a company called Smuggler's Coffee, and it's like nerd themed, like coffee beans. Like, the labels are all, like a brew hope, tomb of caffeination, +1 to charisma, stuff like that. And he does some cool stuff with coffee. But that was one that I thought was really interesting because and you can go check him out, just the way he does it and the way he approaches it in the community, is just very unique and sincere. And so stuff like that, like, as specific as a miniature making painting thing to like something like coffee beans, people find a way to really integrate their love of this game, on more than just a surface level. It's easy to slap a label on something with like a D20 and be like, it's nerdy. But people who have really integrated their love of the game into their product, into how they communicate, into how they engage with people. That's the stuff that like really fascinates me and kind of gets me excited to chat with them about what they do.
That's really cool. This idea of niche, like, to me, tabletop role playing games are already kind of niche, right? So I'm always shocked when I see, like, oh yeah, somebody has taken their love of this other thing and put it together, and now they're making a living because they do this thing very well, and they're also one of the only people in the marketplace marketing towards us, right? Marketing towards tabletop game lovers like us. And so, like, the idea of someone taking their love of coffee and all their nerddom and smashing it together, is really so inspiring. I almost wonder, like, is tabletop role-playing games and D&D more specifically, like, are they a niche hobby anymore? Like, at what point are we like, this is a thing that a lot of people do and have fun doing, and a lot of other people would like to do and are getting into right now, because it's growing and it's huge.
It reminds me a little bit of when Apples to Apples got big, and then Cards Against Humanity got big, like the first kind of like mainstream party games, as far as like, I felt like everybody was playing it. You would go to a game night, be like, let's play Apples and Apples, and then or Apples to Apples, or whatever it was called. And then after that was Cards Against Humanity. I feel like it obviously hasn't reached that level yet, but there's a similar vibe where, like, even just 2 years ago, where I was like, oh yeah, I've got my D&D game. Now, if I say that, people are like, oh yeah, I tried that the other week. Like, people you would never expect. They're like, oh yeah, some friends said we should do it. So I feel like it's reaching that, right? Like, it's weirdly everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it really, really is. And it's interesting because, right now we're in these uncertain coronavirus times where people are really quarantined. And it feels like the fact that everyone is inside has more people are trying role-playing games than before too, like that it's continuing to help role-playing games go because it's a way to get together and interact with your friends. And like, I have Zoom calls all the time these days, right? And video calls and stuff, but they're always kind of slow because it's like, well, we don't really have anything new to report, right? Like we're all sort of in this same trying to figure out what day it is haze. And so having something to do, having a game to play is really helpful with the socializing and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And people are benefiting obviously from years of people developing the technology and the platforms to be able to do stuff like this, right? So it's really kind of a perfect time. Not that there's a perfect time for a pandemic, but as far as like having the resources to entertain and engage and connect in the midst of that. It's not like suddenly we're like, okay, well, how do we play D&D online? People are like, oh, we've been doing that for years. Here, go have fun.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we have the resources to do so much more. And I do think about, like, if this was 10 years ago, if this was 20 years ago, right, it would be very different. It'd be much more, social isolation would feel a lot more like isolation. And so I am so glad we have the internet, but have tabletop role playing games as a way to like connect with people. And I also see people trying new stuff, right? Like people getting into new games have the time to read new games, right? Because that's a barrier to entry. Is like, well, I got to read this other giant rule book. Do you have games that you play or read or want to try other than D&D?
Man, there's so many there's so many games I want to play. And time is the hard thing. So the funny thing for me about self quarantining and all of that is I've worked from home for several years now already. And so my day to day hasn't changed all that much. Like I don't suddenly have, I'm still working. I'm very lucky that I still have a job. Many people are not so lucky, but that means that like my day is still essentially pretty full. And then between podcasts and other, side opportunities I'm working on, I just don't end up with a lot of time. I can't remember the last time I got to play a video game. That being said, I would love to play Blades in the Dark is a system or a game that I hear a lot of people talk about. I've watched some streams on that I would really like to try. I very much want to play the Deadlands Reloaded. I love the kind of like weird West thing, so I'd love to do that. I've kicked around the idea of getting into Magic the Gathering, but then I remember that I like not being broke, and that seems like an easy way to to have no money very quickly, especially knowing my own tendencies towards collecting. So, yeah, given the time, and I have a closet full of games that I've like backed on Kickstarter, like New Salem, or I've got the Trogdor game, and like that I've either played once or are still in their packaging because I haven't had a chance to even open them. So, yes, there are many games I'd like to play.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a quick moment to let you know about Burn Bright. Burn Bright is an original science fantasy RPG that I led the design for. It is available on Roll20 right now. You can check it out at burnbright.com. That's BRYTE.com. Burnbright.com. Let me say it one more time. Burn Bright, Bright is spelled BRYTE.com. So go check it out. It's got a lot of original mechanics that are built to be integrated with Roll20. Right now, many of you are probably playing on a virtual tabletop. There's a starter set, there's the full game, or you can get it all in one sweet, sweet bundle. Plus, there's more products coming. There is going to be more support for this system. So go check it out, burnbright.com. I would appreciate it so much. Let's get back to the babble. You said that you do e-commerce stuff. How has that helped you in podcasting?
That's a great question. And that I'll kind of probably segue that into something else. So it was funny when I first started the show, and you can probably speak to this as well. There are very little metrics available for podcasters, and the ones that are available are from like Serial. It's like, oh, they got 12 million downloads. I'm like, well, cool, great for them. I don't know where I sit, and so because I work in ecom, and so much of that is analytics driven. Daily I'm looking at, okay, where did people come from? How much time did they spend on this site? When did they click somewhere else? How likely were they to add a thing to their cart? All that data helps me make decisions in my job. And so then suddenly I was trying to podcast and I felt like I didn't have that data. And I even went to Reddit at one point on like one of the podcasting subs and I was like, hey, I've been doing this for about 2 months. Like these are my numbers. I don't have a problem sharing those because none of us are making money doing this. But I'm curious, like what are the benchmarks? Like what's kind of normal? Does anyone mind sharing? And like I just got a slew of responses of like, don't look at the numbers. You'll go crazy trying to track your download numbers. You should just be doing it for like the love and the joy of podcasting and blah blah blah. You shouldn't get hung up on how well you're doing. I'm like, I'm not getting hung up. I need to make decisions. I want this show to be successful. I would not have started this show if I did not think people would enjoy listening to it. I wouldn't keep doing it if I did not think it was providing something of value into the world. And so my response to them was like, oh, I'm not, this isn't an ego thing. I'm not like afraid I'm failing. I want some directions because you're just kind of screaming into the void a little bit, kind of literally and figuratively, not knowing what's going on. So from ecom, that definitely drove a lot of some of my early decision making. What kind of metrics can I track? Can I optimize my release time? Can I what ways of contacting people? What kind of DMs do people seem to respond to on Twitter that then make them say, hey, yeah, I will join your show? So there was a lot of fine tuning of like my email message to invite people and how I pitched the show so that it didn't come across as some dude who just started something up and was recording this in his daughter's playroom, which is exactly what it is. um, so that was a big influence because and I'll go back to this because it felt important. Because like I said, a lot of people talk about podcasting like, oh, I would, if no one listened, I would still do my show, which is awesome. Like that's a cool thing. More power to you. And I think that's a great attitude to have. For me, I wanted to, like I said, make something that people enjoyed, that they experienced. And if, if tomorrow I stopped getting downloads, I would be worried because I would think there was something wrong with my site. But if that went on for a while and I couldn't book guests, I would probably stop doing this. And that's not a like give up, if hard times come, but it's a desire to build something successful that impacts people and lets me be part of a community in a valuable contributing way. And so the way I know how to do that involves analytics and data and being intentional and how I put things out. So that was kind of my approach. I was like, I want this to be successful. I want to do well at this.
I agree with you. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to look at the data and be successful at the thing that you put a lot of time and energy into. And there's nothing wrong with having a different measurement of success, right? If somebody's measurement of success is, I feel great about the thing I made and I don't care if somebody listens to it or not, that's great. If somebody's measurement of success is, I would like to grow this to a certain numerical point with listeners, that's also great. I am with you 100%. It's like, I'm doing this because I want people to listen to it. If I wanted to talk to you about games, we would just talk about games and not deal with everything else that comes.
You don't have to
podcasting.
edit a phone call. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's really very interesting too, to listen to the data, because I think a big thing with podcasts is you don't have the numbers the way YouTube or television or streaming does, right? Those numbers are private and sort of held by you. And even on the private end, you have to go through some hoops to actually measure those numbers yourself. You're not like looking at a thing and then figuring out what really counts as a listen, right? What really counts as a download, all that kind of stuff is fascinating. So yeah, we have like Apple Podcast charts, Google Play Music, like who's topping the charts and that kind of thing. But like, it is really very interesting because I've been part of conventions, right, with groups of streamers and YouTubers and podcasters, and it's like, oh well, we didn't give the podcasters as much because these YouTube channels have whatever 10,000 subscribers, and it's like, oh, do you know no one asked us how many subscribers we have those numbers. Right.
Well, and that's what's so fascinating about podcasting as a platform is because like contrasted with YouTube, right? Like YouTube is self-contained. It's where people go to watch. It's where people go to produce content. And so you can track a lot of the data that we talk about. Podcasting is literally an audio file that people can access any way they want. And so I can see that someone downloaded it. I don't know if they listened to it. Apple Podcast can tell me I have 40 subscribers. It can tell me I have 40,000 subscribers, but that's only counting people who are listening on Apple Podcasts. And so, and then I'm sure it's the same for you, but you look at your own download numbers and you see a chart and you're like, okay, you had this many from this podcast app and this many from this podcast app and this many from this podcast app. And it's still very much at the infancy of standardizing everything from your show notes to your audio quality to like every little thing. It's still very much a young genre, so it's fascinating, like from the outside going like, okay, where will this industry go? How will we as podcasters be better equipped to connect with people and track what we're doing, because everything else in the world is incredibly trackable. Like I said, I can see who visited, my site, what device they were on, what time they spent there. I can tell where they came from, like how to, like I can, find out if I want to, when was the last time they bought a car. Like there's crazy amounts of data available in the internet, but it's not there for podcast yet. So you are kind of, you know, swimming in the deep end, unsure of where the bottom is.
And it's fun. I really like podcasting. I think because I like them best as a consumer, right? I love that I can. I think the the multitasking aspect, the fact that podcasts are a little like cultural wallpaper in that sense, right? That like you can do other things with them is a really good thing. And when I was a kid, I was like into music, but I was never super duper into music, and so having something where it's like I am super duper into talking about games obviously and comedy and things like that, like being able to focus in on that is great. What are some of your favorite podcasts outside of the gamosphere?
Yes, I was like, I bet he's about to ask me what my favorite podcasts are. I will open my subscription list.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I have a few. There's a show called Story Break, which is done
Oh,
by
great show.
Freddie Wong of he does Dungeons and Daddies, and if you're into YouTube, you've been watching Freddie's content for years, and that's really entertaining. It's Freddie and a couple of the guys that work with him, essentially like writing like a Hollywood script, like one scene at a time, like live on the show, and that's really entertaining. I enjoy that. Greg Miller, formerly of IGN, now he has kind of funny. He has a show called We Have Cool Friends, which is similar to what we're kind of doing, is where he interviews friends of his in the industry about the cool things they're doing. That was a big inspiration on me as a show and as an interviewer. Let's see, what else do I like? There is a guy named Michael Hyatt. He's like a kind of like a business guru kind of person, and he has a great program called Lead to Win, where he just kind of talks about best practices in business. And what I like about that is it's really more like, how can you engage with people better? How can you, it's not all like, what can you do to increase your bottom line? It's how can you be a better leader? How can you be a better, manager of people and, kind of achieve like your business goals? And then I listen to a couple sports related ones because I'm super into sports. So, and then all my D&D ones.
So you said you're working from home. You've got you're in your daughter's playroom. Uh how are you finding like balancing the dad thing with the playing Dungeons and Dragons thing, with the podcasting, with the working thing? Like how's it all going?
I mean, again, like I am incredibly lucky. And so, I do not want to discount. What I hate is when people people are like, "Oh yeah, it's so great because I'm in this perfect ideal situation. Everyone should be in an ideal situation like me." Well, we can't all be, but I was pretty lucky several years ago in 2017. I got laid off from my job, and my wife had been telling
Sounds
me,
very lucky.
oh yeah, it was every time I've been laid off has been legitimately has actually ended up being a really good thing. So
Oh, that's great.
at the time, yeah, it sucks. But especially because I got laid off from my job the day we signed papers on the house that I'm in right now.
Oh no.
And I don't know, about 3 or 4 weeks before we found out we were pregnant. So it was a time. It was a real time. But my wife had been telling me for a while because she was kind of getting aggravated at the hours I was working, and I was always kind of on call late at night to fix something on the website or whatever. She was like, "You need to get a work from home job where they pay you a lot of money." I was like, "Those don't exist." Um, and then after several months of being unemployed, I actually found a work from home job that was very financially viable, and that was summer of 2017. So I've spent the last couple of years really kind of honing what you were talking about. How do I balance my work? How do I make sure that I'm being a good and effective worker? Because working from home is difficult, as everyone's learning right now. You don't have a boss checking in on you. You don't have people looking over your shoulder. You have to be very self-driven, and make sure you're on top of things. So I've been lucky that I had a foundation of how to work independently. And then my wife stopped working. She's a licensed professional counselor. When she got pregnant, she stopped working, so she's at home with our kid, and so we've been really good about building out kind of a schedule that lets me get all my work done and still play with my daughter and not feel like I'm only seeing her for an hour at the end of every night. As far as podcasting goes, I do what I do right now, which is during her nap time. Like I'm like, all right, go down. I'm going to go record an episode. But yeah, it can be difficult, and um, it's definitely a struggle, which is why I have an episode to publish tomorrow that I've yet to edit. Because life comes at you, and you have to juggle and balance. But trying to not take too much onto my plate, and being intentional about how I schedule and plan out my week. I mean, I could go on for a while about planning and scheduling, but I think that might be boring content. I don't know.
Well, let's talk about Roll for Persuasion in terms of dream guests. Who have you not had that you want to have on? I don't want to brag, but we have some people who listen to this show sometimes.
Hi, Chris Perkins. My name is Andrew, and
I don't know if he listens, but
well, so it's funny. When I started the show, I made a list. I was like, what are goals that I have for myself? Because I want to have goals. Again, I don't just want to shout into the ether. I want to have, measurable things I'm trying to attain. And I don't mind sharing them because I'm going to. One of which was I want to someday be involved in like an official Wizards event, publication, something, right? Like in my mind, it was D&D Live, which RIP for this year. But I was like, okay, so that's going to be a goal. What's my next goal? I want to have Brian W. Foster on because I like that guy. I think he's a cool interviewer. These are my pie in the sky. If I haven't done these within, I think at the time I said like 2 years, I need to question how I'm doing the show because I'm going to make these, this is what I'm going for. And so then 6 weeks after I launched, I got Brian on the show and I was like, oh, did I set my goals too low? And that's a whole other story. But dream guests, like I feel like I've gotten a lot of them. Like Satine Phoenix was somebody who was kind of a dream guest for me, and Ivan Van Norman, who have all been on the show. I recently got to talk to Margaret Weiss, the co-author of the Dragonlance novels that I grew up loving and reading. I think for now, there are definitely people that I want to be able to talk. Chris Perkins is obviously one of them, just because Chris is huge in the industry. Deborah Ann Wool is someone that I would really love to chat about D&D with. Stephen Colbert is a dream guest. Like, I mean, if we're talking pie in the sky, people like that, people in the the entertainment industry, especially lately, who have been, I don't want to say like being able to kind of come out and talk about the fact that they're playing D&D. That's kind of what's happened over the last kind of years, right? Like Joe, I can never say Joe's last name, Manganello, um, Steve Colbert, Deborah Ann Wool. People have been playing for a long time and have also been like, kind of top list celebrities, but haven't been open, I guess, about it. I think that's super cool. The Big Show is a wrestler. I would love, he seems like a cool dude. I'd love to have somebody like that on. So yeah, people like that.
Gotcha. Well, on the off chance any of them are listening, you should do Roll for Persuasion. It's a great show. Reach out to Andrew. Make it happen.
I am Roll for Persuasion, and I approve this message.
So, Andrew, I know we're getting towards the end of nap time here, but before we go, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, so you can, if you want to subscribe to the show, you can go to rollforpersuasion.com. All the episodes are there and the subscribe link. If you want to interact with me on social media, at Roll Persuasion on Instagram and Twitter. My Instagram feed is very, very dead. I just don't I'll put more pictures of my microphone on there. I guess that's what I have to take photos of. But I'm very active on Twitter. So come check me out on Twitter at Roll Persuasion. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
That is really great to hear, Andrew. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that Roll for Persuasion continues to rise and is amazing. And everybody should open up their podcatcher apps right now, subscribe to Roll for Persuasion so that you can hear more of Andrew's dulcet tones. And thank you so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, man. It's been great.
That was a great interview with Andrew. You know, people, Tabletop Babble is going to be around for a while, but I am leaving as its host after episode 200. That will be my final episode as this podcast host. It's moving over to Geekspective, where Amber, John, and Kenny are going to take over hosting duties, and Amber is going to be the new showrunner and producer for the show. I am really, really excited about this, and we are going to get them on the show. Plus, we've got some of the best episodes yet to come to your ears still here on Tabletop Babble with me hosting. So thank you so much for listening. If you haven't gone over to Apple Podcasts yet and left us a 5-star review, please do it. It takes about 30 seconds of your time. It's going to help other people find the show, and it will be a great thing for the new hosts and the new network to have a strong show with great reviews heading into the future. So please do that. And if you've been listening, thank you so much. I cannot tell you enough how much I appreciate it. All right, people, you can find out more about what I am doing over at worldbuilderblog.com and over on Twitter at James Intricasso. I'm still going to be part of this industry. In fact, I'm ramping up the game design stuff. So get ready for all of that. Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, and it's edited by Nate Pauzenga. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding DSPN with me. Don't forget that you are amazing.
Gather round, travelers, to hear our tale. What can I say about the Venture Maidens? As much as I want to just go on and on gushing about my favorite podcast, I'll try and keep it short. The players are absolutely fantastic. I think my favorite thing about the Maidens is the way they collaborate with their fan base. They've created a community for us that they're also a part of.
If you enjoy having your heartstrings pulled out of your chest whilst floundering for air and weeping silently to yourself because Celeste's descriptions of literally anything will make you wish you, too, were about to embark on an epic adventure with 3 killer ladies. Really killer. Killed a lot.
This story is epic. I have cried tears, and I am not kidding. I have so many favorite moments. Kara's hangover routine, Sayu's workouts, Arnadel's awkward flirting. I just love you guys so much.
There's a lot of Dungeons & Dragons actual play podcasts out there, so why should you care about the Venture Maidens? Well, if you like games that don't shy away from heartbreak and romance, this is the podcast for you. If you're looking for a podcast where character development is just as important as slaying monsters, this is the podcast for you. And lastly, there's an episode where everyone does their best Godzilla impressions. You gotta hear it.
Join the Venture Maidens on Twitch, YouTube, or wherever podcasts are free. And don't forget to venture away.